And please do remember that probably the end of this session, we're going to momentarily, it's just one of the hiccups of the process here, momentarily kick you out of the room in order to do some video transcoding in the background so that eventually these recordings can make it up to the OLC YouTube channel. So let me just kind of give you a reminder that to get your way back here at the end of one of these kicked out sessions, you need to go to bit.ly, the URL shortening service, bit.ly, bit.ly/OLC live room, OLC live room, lowercase, no spaces. So once we do that, probably at the end of this next session, you can find your way back in. Looking ahead, we have, after Autumn and Roland, we've got Eric Fredrickson and Peter Shea at 3:45 Central Time joining us here to talk about networks of leaders in our online and digital learning space. And then I think we might have one other session before we call it a day, and then join us back again tomorrow morning, Thursday. We'll be here Thursday all day and a half a day on Friday. So tell your friends, send a link out to your colleagues. I think I've vamped enough. So earlier today, if you were with us on the tour of the Innovation Lab space that Dave Goodrich led us in, he gave us a glimpse, a little peek of the innovation installation. And so here, with a much more up close and personal view and a conversation with the creator, is Autumn Caines. Autumn.
Hey guys, how's it going? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. Sorry, I just kind of ran down here and set this up with my my headset and everything. So I am here today with Roland Moe, the creator of the installation, the innovation installation. Roland, I want to do a check on you. Can you hear me, and can I hear you? Can you say hello?
I can hear you. Hello, everybody. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. That looks good to me.
Fantastic.
How you doing?
Doing well.
So before we...
Sad to not be there, but so happy that it is live and it looks fantastic.
So here's the thing. I have this thing with my name where I have two M's, and everybody wants to correct it, and they kind of mess it up, and then like nobody can remember. And so I'm just going to come clean and ask you, is it Roland or is it Rollin?
So technically it is Rollin, but
okay.
Similar to Autumn, I have dealt with this all my life, so I will answer to anything remotely close. But yeah, no, it's like Colin with an R. But then of course Colin Powell reads that as well. So just at some point you have to take your lumps. So
I just wanted to clarify that because I don't want to call you by the wrong name for the whole interview. So I'm actually inside of the physical installation right now. And I'm just gonna, I figured while we're interviewing, I could just like let it play in the background, but we actually have several stations set up. So I'm just gonna flip my camera really quick and give everybody a little tour of it. I might even actually walk from outside and give you guys a bit of a, like, so you come up and then there's the innovation installation here. And we've got defining innovation. And then we walk in and then it's on several screens here as we go along, and they're all on a loop on different timing so that you can sit down and just kind of jump in, because as I understand it, Roland, this is not, the installation doesn't have like a linear process necessarily. You can kind of jump into it at any point, right?
Exactly. So one of the, and Autumn, thank you so much for showing that off. A little bit behind the purpose of this. So this is the third year for OLC Innovate. And it's the third year that we've had a group called the Innovation Installation. The meaning behind that was twofold. One, if you're going to have a conference about innovation, where is there a space to explore the critical aspect of that? Here's a word that we quite often don't put into the same sort of vocabulary and definition rigor that we do with words such as data or student or online. Innovation kind of just gets fiated into this conversation. So in order to do that, we wanted to have a critical space to have a larger discussion about innovation. And then secondly, doing that in a manner that would be somewhat emergent or, dare I say, innovative. So that was the brainchild of the innovation installation. So in 2016, we looked at the past of innovation. What got us to the point of having a conference on innovation, the term with a 2,500-year history. And then in 2017, we looked at the present of innovation. We brought in practitioners who were leading innovation initiatives in K-12, higher ed, and private practice, and even governmental policy, looking at the struggles they were having in finding coalescence around this word. And this year is the future of innovation. So with all this work that's happening, what are some of the unintended outcomes in a critical, oppositional, or even negative aspect? What I call the innovation bycatch. So when we think about innovation as this thing that's moving politics and policy and educational institutions, what are we not thinking about this happening? What are we not accounting for, measuring for? And the whole purpose of this is to try and create a conceptual space around the topic of innovation, because we use this word so often. And we all have understandings of what it means, but are those understandings shared in a greater space? There's some great literature out there that innovation is the perfect non-concept. And the history of innovation would show that, that innovation is a term that does not have a great resonance as a meaning in and of itself, but rather it is a signifier of something else. For the most of history, that was a negative. Only in the last 150 years has innovation been something positive. So we did the future around experimental film because of that nonlinear aspect that Autumn mentioned. We want to have a place where people can just jump in and have a learning resource that challenges them, that provokes them, but doesn't require, I don't know where people are coming into the conversation. I don't know when people are ending the conversation. So how do we have this conversation by bringing it forward in a nonlinear fashion? So there are 6 screens playing all different loops. You can jump in at any time for the conversation. And we have a website as well for anybody who's not on site, which is www.defininginnovation.com, and the 6 films are there. If you're on site, it's pretty awesome because you have that feeling of all this stuff playing around you and that dissonance and a chance to speak with people afterwards. If you're off site, there's a value add there as well because we're able to focus on some questions that come out of this. What are some of the things practically to think about, and what are some things that might not have to do with academic innovation but have a lot to do with the topic? So it's and then we have a flip grid in the Twitter channel. So there are a lot of opportunities to engage with what we're doing. But in general, we're just trying to have a greater understanding that innovation is not a positive, superlative, omnibenevolent term, but rather a term that has a very political and power-based and historically structured meaning.
Sorry, I needed a second to unmute there, and they just started a big presentation right across over here. I hope that you guys can hear me okay and that I'm not, you're not going to get too much background noise on me. I think it's really important, and you know what, hats off to OLC for doing something like this and putting it right in the middle of a vendor hall, because I think too often we oversimplify. At one point, I haven't been able to sit down and watch the entire installation, but I think it was maybe in the commercialization of installation, you really challenge this idea that we're just going to think of innovation as a good thing, no matter what. It's just benevolent. And then not challenge the companies, not challenge the people who are using that word, even if it's the academics, not challenge the people who are throwing that word around so loosely to be benevolent, just assuming that the benevolence comes with the innovation itself.
Absolutely. We are at a conference like this with innovation in some way part of our jobs, whether it's a job description. My job is the director of academic innovation, or whether it's a platform or a time request in your position as an instructional designer to be working on innovation, or as a project lead, as an administrator, as a faculty member. The demands of innovation from our spaces are growing. And so if we, just throw that term in, what are some of the things that we might be missing? I think that there's been more attention paid to critical aspects of educational technology over the past year. I don't think Facebook meant to bring that conversation up, but it's become much more prevalent with the manner in which people's data is being harvested and utilized. There are great scholars. There's a great bit of work recently by David Columbia and Chris Collier that has come out in a number of massive publications about this. And so how do you rectify that critical space and the negative aspects of educational technology with this word that we, as earnest educators who have gotten into this to create a better environment for people to learn and then subsequently live in? How do we work both at the same time? And so this is just one place to think about that a little bit more, a starting point for a greater understanding of what innovation means. So, you know, my charge in this is, how do I, as somebody who is tasked with innovation at an academic institution, how can I be thoughtful about that task and needing to drive progress in higher education, while understanding that, you know, there are private companies and their job is to bring profit, financial profit to their companies. And our partnerships are very different because traditionally education has not been profit driven. You can make an argument that that's not the case anymore, but that's the basis on which many of us are working from. You know, what are the discriminatory practices? One interesting thing, there's a film on the discrimination aspects of innovation. And I focus on innovation hubs and what we're saying in these places where, you know, I live in Seattle, Washington, Seattle, Portland, Austin, Texas. These are cities that have seen remarkable population increases and remarkable increases in how they measure innovation, which is often by patents. But there are other indicators that can happen as well. And those cities are seeing a leveling off of minority or underrepresented populations, and in some cases actually seeing a decrease. And there's academic literature to back up that that is normal. When innovative sectors come in, they move minority populations out. And so what does that mean? If we're talking about innovation as this benevolent good in higher education, that the innovation practices that we link to in our literature are saying that they're going to create a social better, but they're creating that social better for a very small population and forcing another population to the margins. Can we then look at the technology that we're bringing in, such as MOOCs, which are supposed to democratize education? Can we look at those as this benevolent feature? We look at the MOOC literature, it shows that the people who do the best in MOOCs are the people who were doing the best in the education system as it was.
And it's really funny that you would bring up the gentrification piece, because here in Nashville, I'm actually not staying at the hotel. I'm staying in East Nashville in an Airbnb. That is just, it is so obvious that it is a gentrifying neighborhood. Like, it's just stark differences. You got a house on one side that's basically boarded up, and then a house right next to it that is completely renovated and just absolutely gorgeous. And I mean, you can just tell just by the people who are hanging out on their stoops, and like that there's real class disparities between the groups there. And so it's fascinating to think about, like Airbnb, when we talk about technology, bringing that in, right? Somebody like bought a house and decided to just, like, because they could get it cheap in this neighborhood and renovate it, and now they're renting it out and making a profit on it. But what is that doing to the neighborhood? Now the neighbors don't have neighbors who are like there all of the time. There's nobody for them to create a relationship with. There's just this constant turnover. And I mean, I don't want to, put anybody in a box, but I mean, a lot of people get Airbnbs not for a conference or to do something professional, but because they want to have a party for a night with a bunch of their friends, right? And so what does that do to the neighborhood?
Well, and one thing,
so
please go ahead on.
I was just going to say, is this solutionism? This problem? The theory behind this better than I do, and the philosophy maybe better than I do. Is this solutionism?
I mean, there are aspects definitely in, if we blindly accept innovation as a positive, then we very easily can move into a solutionistic mindset. So that's technological solutionism. Most recently, Yevgeny Morozov has framed that as this. There was also, I don't remember, cyber libertarianism that David Columbia coined, but this idea that our technologies are going to be able to fix social problems. And so this investment in technology will have an outcome, a trickle-down social economics, if you will. You can link that in innovation back to Christopher Freeman, the economics of industrial innovation. It was really the first time in the concept of innovation that innovation didn't need a modifier. So in the 50s and 60s, when you thought of innovation, it was technological innovation. In the 19th century, it was social innovation. Everett Rogers even talks about diffusion of innovations, but he's writing as a sociologist. And it's very, very clear that his interest in innovation is in changing processes in environments. So it was Freeman who kind of brought both those terms together to where innovation would be, just in general, a use of technology to have a social benefit. And that has, over the last 40, 50 years, really turned into something that could be solutionistic. So how do we, in working with technology, really represent upfront that we're not creating a panacea by bringing in a learning management system or a proctoring software or some sort of digital tool, that this is all part of a larger engagement. And in order for it to work, we need to have an understanding of all aspects. So I think the worry is that it becomes solutionistic. And hopefully by having spaces like this, we can start to push back on that and say, okay, well, let's not get too far ahead of what we're trying to do. We've obviously all invested in technology. We see a benefit there. It's ironic that people who have studied technology and work in technology regularly are now often having to say, pump your brakes there, kid. This is getting a little out of hand. That's a very fascinating space to be living in. I do want to go back to one thing you were talking about, Autumn, in the, in kind of the makeup of OLC, and this is one of the things, unfortunately, of me not being there. I know there was a tour of Vanderbilt yesterday, and I'm wondering if there was a tour of Fisk. Fisk is a historically Black college university, and one of the most well-regarded in the nation. And has fantastic administration, has really been working hard after some trouble that they had financially and administratively 15 years ago. What is has there been a tour of Fisk, and what has the discussion been about that relationship? Or has that just been pardoned off to the HBCU aspect of the conference? And this is a critical space, and I want to thank OLC for putting a critical back channel in the conference, to have a space where they are logging the fact that there is a way to discuss the conference as it's happening and are there things that we can improve. But Nashville is a great example of a city that has seen a growth around a sector. That sector's been music, but there is a lot of technological work going on in Nashville at the same time. And what has that done to traditional populations? And has the investment in that sector come at the expense of the greater society? The privatization movie talks a little bit about what does it mean for profit. Are entrepreneurs really interested in society, or are they interested in profit? Can you be interested in both equally? They would say yes, but evidence would suggest that that's not the case. And what does that mean to the people in a society?
Our thoughts about the link between schools' mission and values and the way that they innovate.
Yes, hi, Jim. So great question. For me, one of the things about defining innovation is the understanding that we don't have a conceptual space as a society. We have values that we bring and what we want innovation to be. And so I think it's vital for a definition of innovation to be linked to the mission of a university. That's going to be easier to do at teaching colleges and more mission-driven spaces. But it's interesting. So in mentioning that, and I work at a private liberal arts institution, so we are a mission-driven space. It is interesting to think about who is driving the innovation conversation in the trades, and it is going to be the high-tier Ivy League schools or the R1s. Which are not traditionally as mission-driven or driven by a different mission, so to speak. And that makes it much more difficult to have a general definition of what innovation is. So all of us are struggling with this. I was just at a group of innovation-minded people at the Hailstorm. It got some press in Inside Higher Ed and EdSurge and other places. And they're struggling with what does it mean to have these conversations on a campus and then have these conversations branching out into larger spaces. And a quick shameless plug on that topic. I talked a lot about this and kind of practically how do you drive innovation on a campus in a Future Trends forum with Brian Alexander back in February. And that is up on his YouTube channel. So if you're interested in more practically nuts and bolts of what can be done at those more regional or small private liberal arts colleges, we talk for about a half hour on that. That's ftte.us.
Yeah, those are great. I love those FTE chats with Brian. I was actually just popping over to my Twitter for a second and hoping that Chris Collier will jump in. He was just asking me for a link, so I told him that you had mentioned him. So. Yeah, okay, I think he might join us. So we'll keep an eye out for him. Can you tell me a little bit about the technology of building this project, about building these videos? How long did it take you? What kind of technology did you use? I see you used a ton of Creative Commons licensed stuff. I don't know if everybody knows about that. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit, the technology that you used to build the session.
Absolutely. So one of the things that's important for me, I am an administrator, but I am also a practitioner and a scholar. So how do we model best practices? I hate the term best practices. How do we model the future that we want to see? And to do that, it is my responsibility to incorporate what's happening in emergent spaces. My prior to education background is in film. I have a master's from the University of Texas, and I am interested in the history of educational film. We've really moved away from aesthetically driven multimodal films into this much more lecture-driven content. And while there are narratives being built around that are kind of coming up, it is still very rubric objective based, that this film is going to address this subject, and at the end you're going to be able to walk away with this, which is very summative. And film in its history is very formative, and you don't know where people are going to come in. So the challenge in creating this was to pay homage to the content, but also to think about what's happening in emergent fashion and then build resources that are going to allow that rhizomatic aspect of being able to jump in various places based on your interest and your background. So every piece of media that is there is either public domain or Creative Commons licensed. And we could have gone fair use with this, but I want to celebrate the things that have been put out there in the open. There are a few things that are not prior to 1923, which is always interesting if you're working in open and multimedia. You have this very warped early Western view of film because of copyright law. The music was fantastic. Found some wonderful musicians who are doing scoring for various Creative Commons based projects. This was a labor of love in order to do this. Grandiose ideas of what could happen start to get whittled away as you were going, but it would not be a lie to say this project started the day after OLC 17 and ended yesterday, and all of the changes and things that were happening throughout there. And so definitely some people to thank in the creation of that. Chris would be one of them. Chris Mattia as well, who is a content creator and instructional designer for lynda.com. But the gentlemen in the Innovation Lab, specifically Ben Scragg, John Stewart, and Keegan Long-Wheeler, were lifesavers in being able to bring this to form digitally. And then I do have to make a shout out. My wife, Rebecca, is the director of photography for a little outfit that we are running called Cinemo, in creating more of these assets that have this resonance and can have multiple entry points. So a nonlinear way of thinking about education that does have those touchstones and those takeaways, but doesn't just have that next button learning where, okay, I picked up this concept and now I move to the next concept and now I move to the next concept, but instead being more raveled so that you can be the one to actually unravel it.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. I love that rhizomatic aspect of it, that it really inspires me to take the learning for myself, and kind of run with it. So yeah, that's wonderful.
And the thing about that is it's not Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because you have to be vulnerable. You have to have a trust that what you're putting out there is going to have that information that is necessary. But to design it in such a way that, Autumn, you're going to come in and you're going to watch something and you might have a takeaway on the commercialization aspect because of where you are right now in Nashville. And right now there's the Hyperbole film behind you, which is a 1927 film on the history of the telephone. The white balance is a little bit off, but that's right. But it's, somebody might be really interested in, wow, I didn't really, think about what kind of almost propagandistic aspects happened in the introduction of technology 90 years ago. So, this was for people to understand proper phone etiquette. How do you take care of your phone and the phone company and the people around you in using a phone? It's kind of a fascinating piece of history. And we think about digital literacy, digital citizenship today. There's a long history of that maybe isn't digital, but is certainly technological. So it's important that, for me, education is about introducing people to things they don't yet know they love. And so it could be some aspect of this, and every piece of media has to have its best foot forward at all times, so that if that's the moment that you're going to really be jazzed about something, you have multiple directions that you can go. And then what the instructor, teacher, facilitator, professor can do is say, all right, this is the place of interest. Here's some foundational readings on that. Here's some primary sources. Here are some questions that are commonly asked in this place. Here are people involved in this personal learning network, and just connect people and give them the opportunity to build and learn as they go.
This is such good stuff. I'm hoping that by turning the camera around, I was able to fix that white balance problem a little bit.
Yes.
So
I'm surprised on the pixelation, because that is a couple of these film assets. I mean, obviously film is degenerating. There was an article I read recently that said cassette tapes almost by 2025 will be undecipherable, and if you want to digitize, now is the time to do it. This film and then the introduction, I use a 1903 Alice in Wonderland, and both of those had to be heavily restored in order to be digitized. So, and then it's, we think about digital, we think about link rot. What's all the stuff that's been created today that is now lost because of server changes or lack of backups or other technical problems? There's so many there's so many jumping points to be able to engage with this various topic. This is the film on discrimination, and what's interesting about this film in particular, all this stuff, by the way, is at the website defininginnovation.com. You can watch these films. It has the audio. The scripts are there as well. And then there's some questions about kind of what are some takeaways and places to go with this. But this film was made for elementary school students. It was a film about airports, and it was made for 6 to 10-year-olds to debate the value of having an airport in a city. And so it goes from these beautiful pictures of people putting on leis and getting ready to go to Hawaii to this, and you see, it looks like it's frozen, but
yes. Little skip.
But you see the plane flying over a house that's been condemned, and then it starts to talk about critically what is the negative aspect of having an airport in a city. That was for elementary school students. Do we engage around media in those culturally critical questions in these days? I don't see that often in higher education, much less K-12. So I
know, right? Like the fact that this is this is meant for grade school students. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
I was just gonna go ahead. Go ahead.
Is that, I always look, where is the blame that I could be working with? And for me, it's the learning object. If we've TED Talked everything, TED Talk didn't invent the educational film. TED Talk instead said, in 15 minutes I can solve your problems, and then you can walk away feeling better about yourself without really having to engage beyond that. I would much rather have films that are, a little dirtier and a little messier and I hate to say grittier, but, that challenge and don't necessarily have an answer at the end, but rather points that you can have conversations, and trusting the instructor to be able to put those pieces together and have a conversation with kids. There was something that's coming out of a conference recently that mentioned if you can learn everything on YouTube, what's the importance of a teacher? And if you're not engaging with it, are you really learning it? We're really good, Tressie McMillan Cottom said, we're really good at being able to show evidence of project. We're not good at being able to show evidence of learning. So an event happened, but did we learn something from it? The technology's been able to make the events happen, but if we work towards that, all we're going to do is be creating more events. We're not going to be creating events that then have that outcome of learning. So this is one small effort to try and create around that space.
Hey, I found the it's Alice in Wonderland stuff, so that's playing right now. I also noticed Chris Gilliard is here.
Hey!
So I'm going to invite him to maybe unmute his mic, because I know that he's in the credits of this, and we did just bring in his article with David Columbia as well. How you doing, Chris?
Oh, I'm doing well. Sorry I can't be there in person. How's
That makes
everyone?
two of us.
That's okay. I got you guys, man. You guys are here with me.
I mean, I've already seen so many things that I would be outraged by. I mean, and it's only kind of day one.
Well, and 2/3 of the critical space are off-site now, and actually Daryl's not there as well. So everybody who was involved in the 2017 Defining Innovation was unable to attend this year. So we'll have to have that critical space live on the back channel.
What's going to happen in the future? Did you say that this is the last year that they're going to have this?
So the reason for doing this was kind of, when the conference started, to have a space for a critical back channel. And I was fortunate enough to be provided that space. And then we did the past and the present, and now we've done the future. To be perfectly honest, it's a considerable amount of work. So I kind of looked at this as the opportunity to wrap up this conversation. So if I were the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this is Infinity War, and then it can go in a different direction. So I believe OLC values this space. I mean, look at the room that they've given it. The fact that the gentlemen from the Innovation Lab are running this because I was unable to attend at the last minute. So I think the important thing about this is having a space at the conference on innovation that you can have a back channel that the conference supports and amplifies and lets run. That's been the main takeaway from what we've done. As far as the content information here, it will live on at defininginnovation.com. So right now it's focused on the movies from the future, but I have the artifacts that we built in 2017, and I have the website from 2016, and we're going to merge that over the next couple months and have a resource for the past, present, and future of academic innovation, so that anybody who is interested in this topic can have a launch point to think about it in a more critical fashion.
I keep forgetting to unmute. I'm sorry. I know I saw Chris's name in the credits. Was it one video that you contributed to, Chris, or maybe Roland? I don't know who can speak to this a little bit more, but how does that play in?
So in this instance, unfortunately, I was the one who completely dropped the ball on this. Chris and I were going to collaborate on doing one of these around the topics of his research, which I think are vital to our conversations in higher education, and certainly have a link to innovation. All sorts of different things came up in my work that made it difficult to collaborate. But Chris was vital to the running of 2017 and has been a mentor and an intellectual giant for me. So a lot of the work that you see here is directly and indirectly thanks to the work that he and others are doing. But with all of the work that he's done over the 3 years that this installation has been here, this would not have happened without him.
Well, Chris, it sounds like that's a prompt for you to tell us about your research.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, I can't, because I'm just I'm struck quiet by Rollins' kindness. Oh shucks, what do I do?
Tell us about the Chronicle.
Oh yeah, okay, I'll talk about the Chronicle piece. I just recently had a piece in the Chronicle's special episode, or a special issue on ethics and technology, where I was pretty vocal in calling out institutions and individuals who I think are exploiting student labor and negating the idea of informed consent. Basically, my premise is that ed tech runs on students, that students power the ed tech machine, whether they want to or not. and often even whether they know it or not. And I think it's sort of it's an unheralded issue that I'm trying to bring before. I think too often, and there was just something today about how Pearson ran a bunch of experiments on students with some of their ed tech products. And if you don't follow, if you don't know of Ben Patrick Williamson, who does some really, really fantastic work on this, you should read his stuff. He's probably, I mean, to my mind, at the forefront of doing the research on this stuff. Yeah, Pearson delivered some ed tech products with an attempt to sort of like psychologically manipulate students. And they sent one product to one set of people in classrooms and one product to another, and didn't inform anybody. And, you know, their goal was to see kind of like if they could, if the product with the, with certain messages could make students persist more. You know, and so it's all over the place. I mean,
Chris, what about informed consent?
One of the
was that part of it?
No, it was not. It was not. No one knew except the higher ups at Pearson.
But when we do academic research, that's something that we have to worry about.
Right. One would think. But I mean, and this is part of my larger problem with so much of ed tech is that, and you know, also with platforms in general, is that the thing. So it's very like reminiscent of the Facebook emotional contagion experiment, which if people are not familiar, like Facebook basically tried to determine if they could make people feel happy or sad based on the kinds of messages or the information in their newsfeed. But then also, again, did not ask people if they wanted to be a part of this experiment, you know. My big issue is that ed tech often just takes the terrible practices of platforms like Facebook and Instagram or Amazon or whatever, and layers them on top of the pedagogical practices of their institution. And so, you know, the fact that, I mean, it's not less terrible. Like, it's terrible when Facebook does it, and it's even more terrible when ed tech does it because of kind of who we're doing it to, and their complete inability to know about or consent. So that's what my Chronicle article was about.
Everybody should read it. It's a fantastic piece. Unfortunately, behind a paywall, but there are versions out there floating. If you have a campus subscription or something, definitely make your way to campus and read it there. It is worth it. And just to tie this into kind of how that thinking ties into the production of the resources at the innovation installation. If we are, you know, as Chris mentioned, so we take these vendor products and we take these platforms and we layer them onto the existing platforms of education. We're so fascinated by Uber for education or Netflix for education or Facebook for education. Rather than think about what should we build for education? You know, rather than thinking, okay, so here's this private product that has a publicly facing purpose, but also has a private purpose. Obviously, the purpose of Facebook, as we've been seeing recently, and we've known for a long time, it's just become much more public, has been to sell data to third parties. So do we really, when we say the Facebook for education, obviously we don't mean that, but that's what we're implying and that's what we're building towards. And I see a link between all of that and this general idea of innovation. And if we're going to use the word, we probably want it to mean what we believe it should mean. So in doing that, that's one of the reasons that these resources are built in the way they are, is to create something that is not a polished, you know, TED, but for education. Or, you know, Pearson Learn or My Pearson, or, you know, whatever the video files that are coming out of those textbook publishers as OER, the open washing that's happening there. But actually to produce something that is taking the emergent thought of the time and taking from a discipline like film and educational film and having something that hopefully resonates. but building it thoughtfully in that manner rather than, well, we have this platform provider and I can go to YouTube and I can download a clip. So I'll say fair use and I'll throw that out there. The information that was created for YouTube wasn't created for a cinematic or educational audience. So we need to be much more thoughtful in that creation, in the same way that the work that Chris and others are doing is saying we need to be a lot more thoughtful in what we're putting our students into without their consent, or what is the result. The result is going to be what it is, and none of us like it.
So I could just keep talking to you guys all day about this stuff because, you know, I've got a love for it and I've got a lot to learn. And so, yeah, I could, but I feel like we should probably kind of wrap things up because we've got some other sessions scheduled, and I think they're trying to put together some kind of impromptu thing. So if you're watching this, stay tuned because I think we might have some impromptu stuff. But before we go, there's some URLs that are up around here too. So talking about the physical space and all of the things. The other thing is there's these signs that have these physical URLs, and I know these have different purposes. So Rollin, if I go to OLC, or no, that's the hashtag. But if I go to this one, if I go to OLCII, is that the actual project?
So OLCII.video is the actual film project. And so that's just an easy way, rather than having to type in defininginnovation.com, just OLCII.video, it will take you straight to the site. And one of the things for me in working with physical spaces versus virtual is you're going to lose something when you're not in either one. So I want to make sure there's a value add in both. What's really cool about going and seeing 6 experimental films at once is they're all playing around you. And so there's this interesting dissonance of you're listening to my voice rattle on about the hyperbole of innovation, but then there's a Sergei Eisenstein film playing next to you, and then there's this weird thing about the telephone behind you, and then Mr. Wizard is you know, off in the corner. So all of this, you know, there's a dissonance that you have to wrestle with in that space. So having that is, you know, and then there's the guy, the EDM scene as well. So all of that stuff playing creates a really interesting space for somebody who's trying to engage. You don't get that if you're watching on the website. You have a sequence that you go through the films with. So the website has a couple of other things that we do. We have some questions specifically and some provoking thoughts, both about the films and then tangential to them. And then we're working with Flipgrid. So if you want to post a response, and I would encourage you to do that, you can just click on that and record. And that response can be about innovation. It can be about the films. It can be about something that the films made you think of that has nothing to do with innovation or ed tech or any space from that. I mean, that's the beauty of education that we've forgotten, is this is an opportunity to engage on learning on all sorts of different things. And so there are a lot of different places that you can go from. And the facilitators of OLCII.video are ready to be able to point you in directions towards what that topic looks like. So I encourage you guys to all look at that. And then of course we have the Twitter hashtag as well. And then if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at rmojo, RMOEJO, and would love to chat with you more about this.
And this is the Flipgrid URL, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So you can either go through there, or if you go to OLCII.video and you click on one of the videos, the Flipgrid is embedded there as well.
Okay. Well, thank you guys both so much for coming in and chatting with me about this kind of stuff. Calvin, are you there? Can you come back?
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
We're wonderful here at OLC Live HQ Autumn. What a scintillating and stimulating but not eviscerating kind of conversation about innovation. It's been good.
You got a lot of thoughts, I can tell.
That's right. It's good. It's good stuff. So I'm curious if anybody. I think we've got a little bit of a smaller synchronous audience. I'm sure that folks who are asynchronously viewing this via the OLC YouTube channel after the fact will have even more. And so you've been very conscientious in terms of sharing contact information and so forth. So I imagine that you'll hear more there. But are there any parting thoughts or reactions from those who have joined us in real time? Seeing none, want to say thank you. Oh, what did you get?
I think Jim might be wanting to jump in. Jim, are you trying to jump in?
Yeah, I had to unmute.
There we go.
Myself.
Okay, gotcha. There we go.
Nice. Sorry,
yeah.
I saw you leaning in there, and I was like,
Oh,
he's
right,
trying to
thank
unmute,
you.
I can tell.
You're very observant. I would love to. I think it was a fantastic discussion. And I am really curious about the changing role of the educator, the instructor in the classroom. It seems to me that with advancement in technology, and especially online, you know, being a media curator and or content publisher directly is becoming more and more an expectation of teachers and faculty members. Whereas in the past, 20 years ago, let's say, we had to simply decide what textbook will we have our students read, and the content that we developed was our lecture, right? That we would deliver live face-to-face. That was basically it. Maybe we would have the students watch a movie or something. But now there's so much out there along the lines of media. Doesn't it seem that we're expecting instructors to be much more media savvy, to be actually curators of media, to decide what should we place in our courses? Now they might get some help from course designers at the school or other resources at the school. But along the lines of authorship, it is the instructor who decides what media to curate and place in the course. And that is an added responsibility I don't think was there even 15, 20 years ago. So I'm just curious, maybe to hear from Rollin or Chris real quickly. What do they think about that? Do they agree with that? Are we adding a job responsibility to instructors as media curators?
Jim, that's
and what responsibilities come with that?
No, that's a fantastic question, Jim. I was fortunate enough, I authored a chapter with Linda Poland out of Pepperdine University on K-12 teaching with technology. And one of the things that we talked about was this very issue of the added responsibilities of, I mean, we've really co-opted the word curation from museums in the last 10 years. And curation never really was supposed to, it was supposed to be an expert, you know, a domain-based expert who was working with those spaces. And now everybody is a curator. And part of the reason is because of this media onslaught, the tidal wave of multimedia. But the change in job responsibilities, you could actually trace back almost 40 years. To the early 1980s, when resource or media specialists in libraries were the first ones to lose their jobs in K-12 and then later public education spaces. So you had a time in the 60s and 70s, in the heyday of educational film and educational film strips, where a instructor would work with the media resource specialist to determine what the best assets were. And then that trust relationship would mean that you would take a film strip to the class, or you would take, you know, a movie to the class, and you would engage that and have a discussion around it. When that position was gone, and then when the internet came 25 years ago, suddenly the responsibility was on the teacher. And so on top of all the other added things we have to do, now the teacher had to be curating multimedia content. Mm-hmm. And now we're talking about you need to be creating it as well. So that is certainly an added responsibility that's happening. And I think one thing we need to do is respect the work, you know, so you mentioned it, having instructional designers, course designers, others. I'm thrilled to see that field rising into the stratosphere right now in terms of respect and job growth. And there needs to be more. And that position is so much more than what it usually is thought of, which is the person who codes in the learning management system. Who does the Moodle? Who does the Blackboard? Who does the Canvas? That's important. Who does the Brightspace? Don't want to leave anybody out. But it's important, but it's that there's so much more that can happen. And to have somebody who can work with you on that, who's a resource librarian for the digital and who understands how they play into a digital space and digital learning. That investment is going to have to be at local levels, and then there's going to have to be a movement from there, because otherwise it is just going to continue to be more responsibility on the instructor who already has remarkable responsibility, and depending on where they are, what is their scholarship load, what is their service load, what are those expectations? Something gets cut, and that's why it's so easy to go to YouTube and find the first thing you search. And if you were seeing Mike Caulfield's 4 Moves earlier in the conference, if the first thing you do is go to YouTube, you're going to find a lot of junk in that space. So I guess, you know, in short, there's a long history of this. We're at a point where it's overwhelming, but we had a good model before, and we have the potential for that good model again if administrators, instructional designers, and faculty can really think about how they can work together to, you know, what is old is new, call it innovation. And
one last question, then I'll let you guys go. I am thinking about the middle school student right now today, the 6th, 7th, 8th graders. Can you look into the future and share with us what you think they will expect when they are college students 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now? What type of media and content will they be expecting in their college course experience, would you say?
I mean, I think that it's fair to say that the relationship of multimedia and multimedia primary sources is going to be an expectation, and how those are accompanied by traditional texts. But for me, my interest is on top of what is the world they're living in, and how do we go to that. But what should we give them? And how, not, you know, like, you know, you're getting this, but you need to have, you know, you need Strunk and White. You know, I'm not going to give you the Owl Lab, and I'm not going to give you, you know, the Grammar Police on, you know, on YouTube. I'm going to give you Strunk and White, and you're going to like it because I'm an instructor. How do we create you know, how do we take the affordances of today and create the things to help those students engage? And that's what I'm interested in. So I don't want to be making media because of the popularity of YouTube channels and TED Talks today. I want to be thinking about, okay, these work, but what can I do to take what I know works pedagogically and what I know works aesthetically and combine that with this psychological element that's coming through in TED Talks and YouTube channels, and be creating for that. And that's the place that, if the schools of the future are dedicated to learning, that's the place they'll go. We did have a question earlier, are we dedicated to learning, or are we dedicated to tracking? We're very good at tracking with ed tech. We're not as good at learning.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Great questions.
I need to unmute there. Wow. We're really good at tracking. We're not so good at learning. That's the quote, man. Did somebody tweet that out? Calvin, are you still there?
Yep, right back here at OLC Live HQ, and I think we're at about the point where we're transitioning out of this segment. Thank you guys very much for a very engaged and deep, thoughtful discussion around innovation. We're about to transition into a much lighter segment. You know, you can certainly stand up wherever you are, take a stretch break. And we've been teasing out today that we would give you a glimpse of this lovely venue where we are hosting OLC Innovate on site here in Music City, USA, Nashville, Tennessee. And we're about to do that. We're going to go take a little walking tour around. It's going to be more about the visuals, maybe a little bit of narration, and we'll just get a glimpse of that. So we'll take a little brief break. It'll be a great time to hit the restroom, stretch, get a cup of coffee. We'll come right back in. We'll be doing a little walking tour thing. We'll take a break from that, and then we'll be, I believe, back in to do a networking break where we're going to have some conversations in the hallway with some of our on-site participants. And then after that, we'll have legendary online learning leaders, Eric Fredrickson and Peter Shea, talking to us about the power of networking among leaders in our field. So we're going to switch over, just take a little brief break, have the little slides going on, and it's a little bit of music, and then we'll be back for that walk-in tour. Meanwhile, thanks again so much, Chris, Rollin, Autumn, Jim, everybody who joined in. Back in a few.